The morning they put Cecelia Voss in the cage, it was 83 degrees and not a cloud in the sky. She had been there since dawn. By the time Elliot Crane rode into Harrow Creek just past 9 o'clock, her lips were cracked and her dress was the color of the road. The cage itself was barely 4 feet in each direction. Wrought iron, bolted into a post frame right there in the center of Main Street, where everyone could see and everyone could choose to look away. A sign above it read deaf in letters someone had painted in a hurry, the black still running at the edges. Elliot almost didn't stop. He had 12 miles yet to go, a load of fence posts in the wagon, and a ranch that hadn't had a working hand on it since February. He'd been up since 4. His back ached and his coffee had cold somewhere around mile 3, and the last thing he needed was trouble that wasn't his. He pulled the reins anyway. He sat there a moment, not getting down, just watching. A woman was coming out of the dry goods store and she stepped wide around the cage without looking at it, the way you'd step around a mud puddle. 2 men talking on the porch of the saloon glanced over once, then went back to their conversation. A boy of maybe 10 ran past and threw a pebble. It hit the iron bars with a sound like a small bell, and the woman inside didn't flinch. She was past flinching. Elliot climbed down from the wagon. He hadn't intended to. His boots hit the dirt and he was walking toward the cage before he'd made any decision about it, which was something that happened to him sometimes. His body understanding a thing before his mind caught up. Up close she was younger than he'd thought. Maybe late 20s. Dark hair matted to the side of her face. Her hands resting on her knees were steady, which told him something. People who were truly broken didn't hold their hands like that. She was watching him the way a wounded animal watches. Not with fear exactly, but with a kind of exhausted calculation. "How long have you been in there?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment before she answered. "Since before the sun came up, according to this town." She paused. "Stole $16 from the register at the hotel, according to you?" Her jaw tightened slightly. "I worked 3 weeks cleaning that hotel. I asked for my wages, Mr. Gideon Falk told me I'd taken the money from the register myself and had his son as a witness." Elliot had heard of Gideon Falk. Most people in a 2-county radius had heard of Gideon Falk. He owned the hotel, the mill, the feed store, and a piece of the sheriff's office, in the way that certain men own things without their name ever appearing on the deed. He looked at the lock on the cage. It was a common padlock, the kind sold at any hardware counter. "Who has the key?" "Sheriff Pruitt. He said he'd let me out tomorrow morning if I—" She stopped. "He said he'd consider it." Elliot had a hammer in the wagon. He went and got it. The sound it made on the padlock brought 3 people out of the nearest building and stopped 2 more on the boardwalk. It took him 4 swings. The lock didn't so much open as collapse and the door swung out with a groan of iron. The woman, she told him her name was Cecelia Voss, did not move immediately. She stayed where she was for a count of 3, and then she unfolded herself slowly, carefully, the way you move when you've been in one position so long that straightening is its own kind of pain. When she stood, she was taller than he'd expected. "I don't have any money," she said. "I didn't ask for any. I'm just saying, if you're expecting—" "Ma'am," Elliot said, "I'm offering you water and a ride out of this town, that's all." She looked at him with those exhausted, calculating eyes. Then she walked to the wagon and climbed up without his help. He was aware as he untied the horses and got back up on the seat that a number of people were watching. He was also aware that the sheriff's office door had opened and that a man was standing in it, not coming out, just standing. Elliot clicked his tongue at the horses and they moved. Neither of them spoke until Harrow Creek was a half-mile behind them and the road had bent enough that the town was out of sight. "Where are you headed?" Cecelia asked. "My ranch 14 miles north." He handed her the canteen without looking at her. "You can stay the night in the bunkhouse. Tomorrow I'll take you wherever you're trying to go." She drank for a long time. When she lowered the canteen she said, "Why?" It was a fair question and he didn't have a clean answer for it. "Because nobody else was going to," he said finally. "And because Gideon Falk has been doing things like this for years and nobody stops him and I'm tired of it." She was quiet for a while after that. The road wound between dry hills, the grass summer pale and the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. "My husband died 8 months ago," she said. Not as if she expected a response, just as if she was putting the fact somewhere outside herself for a moment. "We were traveling west. I ran out of money in Harrow Creek and took the hotel work to save enough to keep going." She looked down at her hands. "Gideon Falk told me I had a pretty face and I told him I wasn't interested and 2 days later I was in a cage." Elliot didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say. He'd learned that years ago, after losing his own wife, that most of the things people said when your life fell apart were for their own comfort, not yours. So he said nothing, and he let the horses walk, and after a while she fell asleep sitting up with her head against the side of the wagon. His ranch was called the Crane Place, though he had no family left to give it a name anymore. His wife Margaret had been dead 3 years. They'd had no children. The land was good land. Solid grazing, a reliable creek, a house that had been built to last, and he had spent the better part of 3 years trying to decide whether he wanted to keep it or let it go. and each time he started to let it go something held him there another season. He pulled up to the main house just after noon. The bunkhouse was clean and empty, and he showed Cecelia where the water pump was, and where he kept spare blankets, and then he went to unload the fence posts and tried not to think too hard about what he'd done. By evening she had swept the bunkhouse, heated water for a bath with the bucket he'd left out, and was sitting on the step with her hair damp, and her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she'd found in the kitchen and made without asking. He noticed she hadn't eaten anything. He went inside and put together what he had: bread, cold beans, 2 eggs he scrambled in a pan, and brought it out. She ate without saying much, which he didn't mind. He wasn't a man who needed conversation to fill space. "You know Gideon Falk will send someone," she said. "Probably. You're not worried," he considered that. "Worried isn't the word I'd use." She looked at him sideways. "What word would you use?" "Ready," he said. She almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something in the neighborhood of it, and it crossed her face and was gone. He let her sleep in the bunkhouse, and he went to bed in the house and lay awake for a while, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, the horses shifting in the paddock, a coyote somewhere distant, the sounds that were the same every night and that he had learned to find either comforting or unbearable depending on his mood. Tonight they were comforting. He wasn't sure what that meant. He went to sleep. Sheriff Pruitt arrived the next morning before breakfast, which told Elliot something about how much sleep the man had gotten and how nervous he was. He came with 1 deputy, which told Elliot something else, that this was meant to look official but not to cost anything if it went wrong. Elliot was already in the yard when they rode up. He'd heard them coming a quarter-mile off. "Morning," Elliot, Pruitt said. He was a heavy man with a careful mouth, the kind of man who had learned early that power was best exercised through paperwork and delay. "Here you've got a guest, I do. That woman is a thief and She worked 3 weeks at the Falk Hotel," Elliot said. "She asked for her wages and Gideon Falk had her locked in a cage for it." He kept his voice conversational. "I'd like you to tell me which law says that's legal." Pruitt shifted in the saddle. "There's a complaint filed. Gideon filed it himself." "I know Gideon filed it himself. That's the problem, isn't it? Man files a complaint, you arrest the person he's complaining about, you put a woman in a cage in 90-degree heat, and nobody asks whether what he's saying is true." Elliot tilted his head. "You got any witnesses besides the Falk boy?" Pruitt didn't answer. "Because I'd be interested to know what the hotel's wage records show. I'd be interested to know if Cecelia Voss is listed as an employee for the past 3 weeks. I'd be interested to know if she was paid." He paused. "I'm guessing you didn't look at the records." The deputy was watching Pruitt now instead of watching Elliot, which was its own kind of answer. "This is county business, Elliot." "Then take me to court," Elliot said. "I'd like to be in court. I'd like to see those records in front of a judge." He waited. "Is that what Gideon wants, a judge?" The word judge sat there in the morning air between them. Gideon Falk did not want a judge. Gideon Falk wanted things handled quietly, the way they had always been handled, with a cage and a sign and enough public shame that people moved on without asking questions. A judge would ask questions, a judge would want records. Pruitt looked at Elliot for a long moment, then he said, "Tell her to stay out of Harrow Creek." "I'll pass that along," Elliot said. He watched them ride out. When they were gone he went inside and poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to the bunkhouse door. Cecelia was standing just inside it. She had heard everything. Her expression was something he couldn't quite read. Not relief, not gratitude. Something more complicated than either of those. "He's going to try something else," she said. "Yes, that wasn't the end of it." "No," Elliot agreed, "it wasn't." She took the coffee. "You knew that when you sent them away." "I did." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Why are you doing this? And don't say it's because nobody else was going to. That's a reason for breaking a padlock. It's not a reason for this." He thought about that. The honest answer was something he'd been circling since the night before. Something about the way this ranch had been slowly turning into a monument to absence. Something about what happened to a person when they spent 3 years deciding whether to stay or go, and never quite doing either. Something about seeing a woman in a cage on a hot morning and having the sudden clarity that he was tired of being a man who noticed things and kept moving. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said. "I've been holding still ever since. I think I've been waiting for a reason to stop holding still." He looked out toward the hills. "I'm not saying you're the reason, I'm saying today was." She was quiet for a long time. "I'm not looking for anything," she said carefully. I'm still in the part of my life where I'm just trying to get through the days. I understand that, I just want to be clear." "You're clear," he said. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm saying you can stay and work here as long as you need, at fair wages, paid on time, and when you're ready to go wherever you're going I'll help you get there." She looked at him for a moment and then she nodded once. The way a person nods when they've made a decision about something. She stayed. There was plenty of work. The fences needed mending across the north pasture. The kitchen garden had gone wild in ways that were almost creative, and the accounts hadn't been properly kept since Margaret died, which meant Elliot had been running the place largely by instinct and the grace of a good year. Cecelia turned out to have a head for numbers. Her father had kept a hardware store in Indiana for 20 years, and she'd done his books since she was 15. And within 2 weeks she had organized 3 years of chaos into something legible. She was also blunt in a way that Elliot found clarifying. When he mentioned at dinner one evening that he'd been thinking about selling the ranch because there wasn't much point to it anymore, she looked at him steadily and said, "That sounds like grief talking, not sense." He blinked at her. "Excuse me. You have good land, a solid house, a working well, and a creek that doesn't dry up in August. That's not nothing, that's something a lot of people would give a great deal for." She pushed beans around her plate. "If you want to sell because you genuinely want to go somewhere else, that's your business. But if you're selling because you can't figure out what to do with yourself, I'd suggest figuring out what to do with yourself first." Nobody had talked to him that way in 3 years. He wasn't sure if he was annoyed or grateful. Probably both. "You're very direct," he said. "I've found that not being direct is usually more trouble than it's worth," she said. "People spend a lot of time hinting at things and then being hurt when nobody understands them." He thought about Margaret, who had been gentle and soft-spoken, and who had nonetheless always managed to make her meaning perfectly clear. Different methods, same outcome. He thought maybe that was something you found in certain people. That quality of being understood. 3 weeks in, 2 of Gideon Falk's men rode out to the ranch. They didn't come to the door, they rode past the fence line, stopped, looked at the property for a long few minutes, then rode on. Elliot watched them from the porch. Cecelia came to stand beside him. "Assessment," she said. "Yes, he's deciding whether it's worth the trouble, that's my read." He watched the dust from their horses settle back to the road. "Gideon likes things easy. He doesn't like spending money on problems he could have avoided." "We're a problem he could have avoided," she said. "We are now." The word "we" sat between them and neither of them addressed it directly, which was its own kind of address. The day things came to a head was a Tuesday in September, which was an ordinary enough day in every respect except that it turned out not to be ordinary at all. Elliot had gone into the next town over, Caldwell Wells 12 miles east, to file some papers at the county office. He'd been meaning to do it for months, and Cecelia had told him firmly that morning that if he didn't go today, she was going to file them herself, which she probably would have done and done correctly, which was half the reason he went. He was at the county clerk's window when he ran into Harold Fitch, who was a rancher over near the Gila crossing, and who had known Elliot's father and who had the kind of face that could not keep a secret, even when the secret was pressing hard to get out. "Heard something this morning," Harold said, lowering his voice even though they were the only people at the counter. "Gideon Falk's got a deputy from over in Millbrook coming out to your place today. Real deputy, not Pruitt's man. Something about a formal charge." Elliot was already moving toward the door. He pushed the horses harder than he liked on the way back and came up the drive to find Cecelia standing on the porch, with her arms crossed and her chin level. The particular posture of a woman who has decided that whatever is coming, she is not going to make it easy. The deputy, a younger man, neat uniform, the look of someone who was following orders and wasn't quite sure about them, was at the foot of the porch steps. A second man was standing near the fence. Elliot recognized him. It was Harlan Falk, Gideon's younger brother, who handled things that Gideon preferred not to put his name to. Elliot climbed down from the wagon. "Mr. Crane," the deputy said, and he looked faintly relieved. "I have a warrant here for the arrest of a woman named Cecelia Voss on charges of theft from the Falk Hotel in Harrow Creek." "I see," Elliot said. He came to stand beside Cecelia on the steps. "Does that warrant include the wage records from the Falk Hotel?" The deputy blinked. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean that if Cecelia Voss stole $16 from that hotel, there will be wage records showing she was not owed any wages. And if there are no wage records showing she worked there, then what is the theft charge based on?" He looked at the warrant the man was holding. "Is Judge Alderman handling this case?" "Judge, yes. It's been filed in his court."
"Good."
Elliot reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a folded set of papers. The pages Cecelia had prepared over the past several weeks, beginning with the dates she'd started work at the hotel, continuing through a precise accounting of hours worked and wages owed, signed with her name and with a statement of facts. "Give Judge Alderman these along with the warrant. Tell him that we're requesting a full hearing, that will be present, and that we are asking him to subpoena the Falk Hotel's employment and wage records for the period in question." The deputy looked at the papers. He looked at Cecelia. He looked at Harlan Falk, who was standing by the fence with the careful stillness of a man trying not to show that something had gone sideways. "I can do that," the deputy said. "Thank you," Elliot said. "We'll expect to hear from the court." The deputy folded the papers carefully into his jacket, tipped his hat to Cecelia, and rode out. After a moment, Harlan Falk rode out after him without a word. Cecelia let out a slow breath beside him. "You had those papers ready," she said. "You made them." "I made them in case. I didn't know if you'd use them." He looked at her. "Why wouldn't I?" She seemed to think about how to answer that. "Because most people, when they find out how much trouble a thing is going to cost them, decide the trouble isn't worth it." That's true, he said. But the alternative is Gideon Falk doing this to the next woman who comes through Harrow Creek needing work. And the one after that. He turned back toward the house. I'm tired of things that should have been stopped years ago going on. Because nobody wants to pay the trouble of stopping them. The hearing was 3 weeks later in Caldwell Wells, in the county courthouse that smelled of old wood and pipe tobacco, and the particular weight of official proceedings. Elliot sat beside Cecelia at the plaintiff's table. She had filed a counter-complaint, wage theft, which the attorney he'd brought in from the county seat said was exactly the right move, and watched Gideon Falk across the room. Gideon Falk was a large man, the kind whose size had always done work for him, who had learned early that physical presence saved a great deal of argument. He sat at his table with the confidence of a man who had never had a judge rule against him, which was true, and who had never been in a courtroom with an opponent who had documentation, which was also true until today. The wage records came out in the second hour. They were produced not by Cecelia, who had only her own statement, but by a hotel employee named June Hatch, who had been the day manager at the Falk Hotel for 6 years and who had, it emerged, kept her own ledger because she had learned early that Gideon Falk's official records had a way of changing when it suited him. June Hatch was 61 years old with a voice like gravel and the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time to say something in front of a witness. She said it. Her ledger showed 3 weeks of daily cleaning shifts completed by Cecelia Voss, at the rate previously agreed. It showed the date Cecelia had gone to Gideon Falk to ask for payment. It showed in a separate notation June Hatch had made that same afternoon because something had told her to write it down, that Gideon Falk had told her to remove Cecilia's name from the records. She had not done so. Gideon Falk's attorney objected to the ledger 3 times. Judge Alderman admitted it each time with increasing brevity. By the end of the afternoon it was done. The theft charge was dismissed. The wage claim was upheld. The court ordered Gideon Falk to pay Cecelia Voss 4 times the original wage amount, which was the penalty under state law for documented wage theft. It also ordered Harrow Creek to return a written formal apology to be posted in the same location where the cage had stood. Elliot had not expected the apology. He thought that might have been the attorney's idea. Or possibly Judge Alderman's, who had the look of a man who had been watching Gideon Falk operate in his county for a long time, and was grateful for a clean reason to do something about it. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, the light going golden long across the hills the way it did in September when the worst of the heat was past. Cecelia was quiet for most of the drive, which was not her usual kind of quiet. The comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need filling. This was the kind that meant something was being worked out inside. June Hatch took a risk, she said finally. She did. She could have kept quiet. She's been working for that man for 6 years. She could have told herself it wasn't her business. She could have, Elliot agreed. I want to do something for her. She said it carefully like it was a decision she'd been turning over. I don't know what yet, but something. That seems right, he said. The horses walked, the light changed. I've been thinking, Cecelia said. About whether I still want to go west. He didn't say anything. He kept his eyes on the road and let her take whatever time the thought needed. I've been telling myself that's where I was going, she continued. Because that's what the plan was, before everything. But I think I've been using it as a reason not to make any new plans. If I'm always going west, I don't have to decide anything. A pause, that's not thinking, that's stalling. Stalling is understandable, he said. After a hard year, understandable, she said. Not indefinitely sustainable. He said nothing, and after a moment she turned on the seat and looked at him directly, the way she did when she was deciding to say a thing plainly instead of sideways. You said you've been holding still, she said. Waiting for a reason to stop. I said today was the reason, not a person. The day I know what you said. She held his gaze steadily. I'm asking what you think now. The road curved and the ranch came into view ahead. The house in the fading light, the barn, the good fence line he'd mended in August, the kitchen garden that had gone from wild to orderly and was now somewhere in between, productive and a little unruly and genuinely alive. I think, Elliot said carefully, that a person can be a reason and a day can be a reason and they don't have to be separate things. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that's a very careful answer. I'm a careful man. I've noticed. Another pause. I'll give you an equally careful answer. I'm not going west. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, on the ranch coming closer, on the light that was almost gone. All right, he said, that's it, all right, what would you like me to say? I don't know, she admitted. Something that isn't nothing. He pulled the wagon up in front of the house and wrapped the reins, and sat there for a moment in the fading quiet of the evening. Then he turned and looked at her the way he hadn't quite allowed himself to look at her in the months she'd been here. Directly, without the careful distance he'd been maintaining. I'm glad you're not going west, he said. I would have helped you go. I would have kept my word, but I'm glad you're not going. She looked at him for a long time. The sky behind her was the color of embers. That's something, she said. It's something, he agreed. They sat there another moment in the evening stillness. Two people who had both been through enough to know that nothing lasting was built in a rush, that the most important things arrived slowly, and had to be treated with care. Then she climbed down from the wagon and went inside to start dinner, and he unhitched the horses and put them away. And the lights came on in the house one by one in the growing dark, and the ranch looked the way it was always supposed to look, occupied, and warm, and like something worth staying for.